Welcome to SJS Arts. Today I'm doing something very different for my channel. I have Altaz from Cine Art Therapy as a guest to talk about snobbery. But before I introduce our topic, I want to let Altaz introduce his channel and who he is as a person and what type of art forms he is into. So thanks for coming on, and now you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, SJS, for having me on. It feels a bit surreal to be here because I've always watched your videos and been a great admirer. And always wanted to, in a way, chat with you. So having this opportunity is really great. Yeah, just some 2-3 months ago, I decided to start Cine Art Therapy, just to maybe join the conversation. And for me, the focus is really, I have found in my life art appreciation to have a quite a healing effect. And so I just wanted to have, discussions engaging with film, but I tend to traverse into music and art in general, and even literature, because I feel all that is connected. Yeah, and and that's what I'm sort of into. I'm an explorer. I want to just always know what's out there. Um, I'm curious, so like watching your channel and some of the movies maybe you'll recommend. I like kind of going in there and just pushing the boundaries, because I can see um, what can even change in a person through pushing boundaries,
Yeah.
essentially.
Okay, so that was the introduction. So thank you for that. And of course, we are very similar people in many ways. We both love to tackle many different art forms, and we have very similar kind of open mindset to art, and we both often talk about the same things. How again art can be a good place to find empathy for yourself and for others, and how we can learn so much about other cultures and other types of people through art, which is really good. And that's something that we are gonna talk about today as well. But the main topic here today is snobbery and counter snobbery, and again art appreciation and everything dealing with that. But we've kind of agreed to do a kind of a open, kind of free going chat, so we might have some other rabbit holes here and there that we will tackle. So we'll see about that, and in the end we might talk about something a bit lighter. And again, this will probably be a fairly long conversation, but hopefully you people will enjoy this, and maybe I will have timestamps for people, so it might be easier to watch the chat with those. But now we can go into snobbery, but before that, I'm gonna give a shout out to one of our mutual viewers, one of our good friends, Tony, or who I call Beaches, in the comments, because the Beaches is the OC reference from the fourth season. Again, reference to character of Taylor Townsend, who is my favorite character in the fourth season. But I'm gonna do a one quote from this season to kind of as an icebreaker to this conversation. But I'm trying not to laugh here because I have to do my terrible French accent. But I don't know if I can actually do that because it's so funny. But again, it's like, I don't know, 4 sentences, or depending on if I do several quotes, but it goes like this. What is in your hand? It's a teddy bear. What is in his mug? Gummy bears. Yeah, it goes like that. Again, that's my terrible.
Oh man.
And then he goes like this, that um the constant sunshine is so banal. Look at them down there, so passionless. When French intellectual in California with all those plastic people there.
Oh, that's so funny.
What is this American obsession with closets? Is it that you can hide what you buy so you can buy more, or is it about sex? Yeah. And one more. One more.
One word, yeah.
Yeah. Taylor told me that you went to David Hume's archives in Edinburgh. even I was impressed. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, so sorry
That sounds
about that.
hilarious.
And again, one more thing about this is that, again, I had a dream about this. Recently, I told this to Altaz in our pre-recording talk already, but in that dream, I was this French intellectual, and I went to random people in a shopping mall, and I did that teddy bear quote that I did first, and that was such an awkward dream to have, but very fun dream. I actually mentioned that to Beaches, aka Tony, in one of our comment exchanges, so he knows about that dream already, but not fun. But I thought that it would be fun to bring out the OC in the beginning to show that even a huge elitist snob like myself likes pop culture, like the OC, likes Sylvester Stallone in Rambo, this beautiful grenade toy, and also has just recently read about Schopenhauer's thoughts about suffering of the world. So you can be into the OC and you can be into Schopenhauer, and that's the beauty of art and being an intellectual, that you can be into a very kind of hardcore philosophy, high art, but you can also watch the OC and say, welcome to the OC, bitches. This is how it's done in Orange County. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
when you did that impression, and then I started watching the OC, and then I saw where it came from and who actually says that welcome to the OC, and I just laughed so hard.
Yeah.
So funny.
A great Luke. Yeah. One of the best characters in the first season.
And just speaking of Tony made a comment in one of your videos with discussing Snobbery, and he said, at the risk of sounding pretentious, well, Tony, I want to say you always sound pretentious.
Yeah. And well, he does, but in a very cool way. Yeah, in a very intellectual way.
Yeah, but you know, I'm kidding, right, Tony? So
yeah,
love your comments.
Yeah, Tony's comments are always a kind of highlight when I do videos, and I always can count on him to comment on every single video, whether it's about paintings, music, or film. So he's a good YouTube friend. So shout out to Beaches, Tony, or Dawson from Dawson's Creek. But yeah.
Maybe you guys will publish a book one day with all your exchanges in the comments.
Yeah, it would be fun. There are so many topics covered there. Some of them
very
awkward about our actors that we are in love with and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But some of them are very intellectual, and some of them criticize the God among men, Christopher Nolan. But I don't want to get snobby.
The second
so early.
You said in one video he's the second. Well, yeah, some of you think he's the second coming of Christ. I just don't think so. That was one of the funniest comments. But yeah, okay.
But it's all just fun. Okay, don't take that so seriously. I said in one of my videos, in the Snowberry video, that again I have nothing against Nolan fans, but I sometimes like to make jokes about the toxic part of Nolan fan base. So that's very.
But different. I don't. Yeah, I mean, you and I obviously. I think I'm some 20 years, close to 20 years older than you. So I remember there was a time where you couldn't say that about Spielberg, right? Like anyone who would say anything about Spielberg was like, how could you even think that? And now it's so common for people to say, oh, well, I don't like his particular brand of filmmaking or his choices and all that. And there was a time where it's like, I remember it was like to say something about Spielberg was close to like blasphemy. So it's strange how that works.
Yeah, but maybe now we should get into the kind of the aim part of the conversation. So I think maybe a good place to start would be like defining snobbery and anti-snobbery. So I think snobbery is fairly easy to define. I think with snobs we refer to people who, again, think that they have very good taste in something, or that they are very knowledgeable on something, and then they feel like they have to put down other people for having maybe inferior taste to them, or worse taste to them, or less sophisticated taste to them. And I know many of the anti-snobs, on the other hand, hate the word sophisticated, of course, and they prefer to use the word pretentious when they talk about snobs. So the anti-snobs are the people that kind of put down people who are into high art, and they think that they are just the people who are into high art are just pretending to be into high art and that they aren't authentic, and that the people who are into high art just do it to look smart to other people as some kind of like a status thing. But I think both of these types of people are quite toxic, although I understand where that type of mindset might come from, and we will talk about later, like where does snobbery come from, and I have lots of thoughts about that. But what do you think is snobbery? Do you agree with my definitions and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with your definition. Um, and yeah, it's where it actually comes from, I believe, is a bit of a um, kind of a multifaceted thing that I think we will probably discuss over the course of this conversation. But the crux of it is correct, that there is this feeling that there is there's a superior and an inferior, and by someone talking about something, they are focused on expressing their inherent superiority, versus they're just trying to create a bridge where that can broaden experience. So if what someone might say is like up and down vertical, but what really is, it's horizontal, like what you said when you showed the Rambo and you showed the Schopenhauer and you showed the OC. That's the correct way to look at it, at least from my perspective. It's a breadth, not this superior inferior thing. And so that's where I sort of, I agree with you, like that's where it comes from, this inherent superiority versus inferiority idea. And there's people who enhance that by being on one side or the other, which I think you will probably talk about as well.
Yeah, and of course I lean more into the high art side. I prefer to consume more high art than this kind of mainstream art, but I also love so much mainstream art. Like I always say, I was really hooked on Game of Thrones as well when it was coming out. I like many like mainstream action movies, not necessarily the ones that are coming out today, but came out in the 80s and 90s. But I still do think that the high art is the place where we can get more out of art than the mainstream art. But that doesn't mean that the people who are into mainstream art, that they would be any type of inferior people because they are just into that mainstream art, even though I happen to prefer high art. Like we have already talked about, again, it's the best type of art lover consumes a bit of everything. You have your preferences, but you are always open to challenge yourself, whether it's with mainstream cinema, art house cinema, like some like modern painting that looks very different from your Renaissance favorites, but whatever it can be, it's always good to open your mind to all types of art, no matter your background, no matter your taste, because that way you can learn so much about yourself and other people in many different ways. You can learn what other people are into and what they are like, and through art you can basically learn almost everything about humanity if you pay a lot of attention to it. So that's very beautiful, I think. Yeah.
I mean, you're absolutely right. And one thing that I never managed to make a video on, and I wasn't sure if it would come across too pedantic, but even this term high art, I mean, I look at it kind of in a kind of modern art perspective, like when you see Duchamp's do the fountain and basically take a toilet, right, and sign it, and then put it in a museum as an installation. There was this reaction. I mean, what's this? Is this even art? He didn't even create it, right? And then that's the whole. What you're saying is that it's this blending, right? Of it's not necessary. It's like the blending of things. So one thing I thought of thinking about that sculpture was, well, of course, and I think Hitchcock was a fan of that particular piece of art, because he's the first one to go and put a toilet on the screen when no one did in Psycho. Like no one this was something you're not supposed to do, and he goes and shows a toilet on screen. Is he having a Duchamp moment? Maybe. And I think that's the thing. What you're saying is that blending of, ideas, and whether they're like popular ideas or they are more, I don't know, some kind of a challenging idea or path breaking. I mean, there's space for everything, and that's where the most rewarding kind of experience is, in my opinion.
Yeah, this actually brought me a kind of thoughts about the fact that how some people say that all modern cinema, for example, is bad, or all modern music is bad, and that's kind of a form of snobbery as well. I've seen lots of boomers. I don't want to offend anybody, or but many of them say that I don't listen to anything after 1980 or something like that, and I think that's a pretty toxic mindset, that you heard a couple of songs from like Spotify top 100 and then you think that all modern music is bad, even though it might be that the stuff that is on the top 100 is quite bad, but that doesn't mean that every new music or modern music is bad. So that kind of snobbery about the different decades of art and centuries of art, I think that's something that is worth it to discuss as well. I didn't think of that like before we started recording or when I was preparing for this chat, but I think that's a very interesting topic as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with you.
And again, one more thing about that is that I sometimes fall into that trap myself. Again, with music, I love modern music, but I love older music too. But with films, I sometimes say that modern cinema is in a pretty bad place at the moment. But of course, it might just be that I haven't seen the right films, and oftentimes we kind of find the true gems like decades into the future. So maybe in 20 years, we might think that something that came out now in 2023 is very good, but now in 2023, we might think that it's bad. Like again, even a film like The Shining, it got awful reviews when it came out, but now it's one of the biggest classics. Same with Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. Now people think that it's one of the best David Lynch films, but back then people hated it. So it's very interesting how this our thoughts on art change a lot through time. Yeah, both in like macro and micro levels, or for us personally, but also societally. When society changes and people change and their opinions change.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I mean, of course, that would be a whole topic on its own, discussing the current cinema and saying, what it's doing or what its challenges are. But I think with film, the medium, it's still so young, right? And so we live in a time where everything's happening rapidly. So our perspectives really shift. Oh, okay, when we're talking about 1980, but what does 1980? What is 1980 in relation to 1600? Right? Whereas when we're talking about art, and you look at the Italian Renaissance, I mean, they're going to a classic period, jumping back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, looking at the art and saying, oh, there's something really extraordinary about this, and I want to refresh it or put a new spin. Or when we talk about modern art, right? Let's say modern art, saying what's kind of coming in end of 19th century going into the 20th century, there's this going back hundreds of years and saying, okay, well, for art used to need a form or a direct reference, something biblical, for example, or scene that people recognized. And that was the way to kind of express a particular feeling or thought or idea about something. But now I don't think we need that. What if we remove the form? What does that do? So there's artists ever evolving, and I think cinema in that is very interesting because it's still so young.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, we're talking about something 5 years ago, and does it still hold? And we don't know what something 5 years ago does 100 years later, but we are seeing some of that with pre-code cinema, and some saying, oh, okay, they were really like pushing the boundary there, but that was like nearly 100 years ago, and then you didn't see it for a while, and then maybe you see it again. So it's hard to know in retrospect. Our lives are so short as well. In retrospect, who knows where cinema is going to be hundreds of years from now, or if it's even going to be there. So
Yeah, you are so right that it's such a young art form, only a little over 100 years old. So compared to something like literature that has been there since even like before Christ and stuff. So it's hard to compare those two things together. But you raised another very relevant question, although it's not very relevant maybe for this conversation to kind of get into it more. But you mentioned that maybe cinema won't even be around in a few decades. So obviously that's something that we kind of worry as cinephiles, that whether cinema will last a long time. But yeah, that's a very interesting question and not a topic for another
yeah,
podcast,
exactly.
maybe. But maybe we should get back to snobbery now. So I think we could go into now as the topic of like, where does snobbery come from? We already kind of touched on it a bit, but I also wanted to bring more of a personal side to this, because again, I think I was more of a snob maybe like a few years ago when I was a bit younger, but then I've kind of calmed down when I have matured a bit. But I think for me, because I've often in my life kind of felt like I was some kind of an outsider, there was lots of rejection, alienation, certain type of loneliness. And I think those types of experiences can create snobbery. And I think when I've kind of psychoanalyzed myself, which I do all the time as a self-reflective introvert type of person, I've kind of realized that for me, maybe some of that snobbery came from the fact that I had these bad experiences when I was young. And then now when I'm older, I try to reject the kind of normal people that never understood me, and I never understood them. But now I feel like I kind of have to fight back in a way, with that snobby mentality. But of course, when I think about it rationally, I know that snobbery and being snobby is very stupid. You should live and let live. But yeah, sometimes those emotions just come, those snobby emotions, even if you realize that they are kind of stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously, it's very courageous of you to share those things, and that also inspired me as well to put a little bit more of myself in some of these discussions, or even the Remade Me challenge, because where I feel like our mutually shared like passion comes from for this topic, these things, is from that. So just like you, I've experienced a lot of difficulties growing up, a lot of like contextual challenges, a lot of like personal challenges, and for me, this it wasn't necessarily, I was thinking of it in snobbery, but it was like I felt voiceless, right? In whatever I was struggling with, I felt voiceless. Like I didn't know if anyone in the world experiences what I'm experiencing or the challenges I'm having. And so each discovery in actually started lending a voice, and to me that was so exciting. So I kind of, what you get excited to share that and say this is great because, well, look, it helps explain this particular thing, or you may find yourself in a particular situation one day, and this is going to give you a thread of understanding, right? I shared with you that Khalil Gibran quote that your pain is the breaking of the shell of your understanding. So what it did, and it started, I think, one of, it would just be in these certain films, or all of a sudden you get introduced to Shakespeare in high school. And mind you, I want to make very clear, I was not a great student in high school. I was, I didn't pay attention to my studies. So it wasn't like I was sitting there and at the front of the class, and then Shakespeare like spoke to me. It was like I was sitting there like whatever, you know, and then you hear something and then you say, whoa, how can it be that someone from that period understands something about what it means to be me, or a question I have, or a challenge? And then you get excited and then you say, well, Shakespeare's really cool, even in high school, and people say it's boring, like, you know, and then the idea starts, oh, that's about snobbery, because people who like Shakespeare are people from a particular class, or of a particular socioeconomic class, or are of higher tastes, and all these things start coming in. And what it does is it blocks people who I see, like myself, from something really great. So I kind of look at it and say, don't pay attention to whether it's snobby or not, or where it belongs in terms of in the world of taste. Explore it, because it might just, as you mentioned in one of your videos, it might just save your life. And that's where the whole thing comes from for me personally, and I see that it comes there from there for you too.
I had a very similar experience in high school, where I had a couple of classes that very much inspired me to kind of get more interested in art, even though I was kind of a very mediocre student back then. But fortunately, I'm not anymore. But so one of those classes was like an art history, cultural history class. So that kind of textbook for that class had like pictures of like architecture and painting, and Salvador Dali paintings were something that really caught my eye back then and got me interested in painting. And then there was some mention of like famous philosophers, and that got me interested in that too. And as I've said in some of my videos, I'm kind of an architecture buff, so that's where the interest for that kind of probably started as well. But then I also had this literature history class where the teacher was very passionate about Dante, Homer, Hemingway, and I kind of got very much interested in classic literature then, and I read some Dostoevsky back then and Hemingway, and then after that I've tried to read classic literature whenever I feel like it, and I've gotten more and more into it as I've gotten older. But it's very interesting to see how like the high school experience, even though it wasn't like very good for me overall, but then I still kind of got something out of it, and I still have some of those influences, even though I've kind of found art in many ways myself, like I have talked about in my channel. But yeah, we should continue with the kind of that we was just talking about, like where does the snobbery come from. So obviously we made the point that it can come from those toxic experiences that you have when you were younger. But of course, I don't think all snobs have that same background. I think some snobs are just snobs because they're assholes. It's just that simple. I don't think all of them have like tragic pasts or anything like that. Obviously, some people are just not that nice people, even though they maybe had an okay childhood. But yeah, I'm sure there are also, again, maybe many other reasons why people might become snobs, but it can be hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I think we were sharing like where our interest in things that are seen, maybe kind of categorized as being snobbish, or trying to prove a higher taste than any other people, where you found that thing, it has nothing to do with snobbery. But snobbery in itself, absolutely, I agree with you, because snobbery has a lot to do with so many things that have come up in your videos and in the chats of different people. All right, like Nazrin Prod, he had mentioned this whole thing about tribalism, for example. And so there is that whole aspect of like social stratification and tribalism and identity, and okay. And I think the OC, I can see why you and Tony like that, because it is actually subverting that constantly, right? It's showing this, oh, when you're in this circle, it's just a matter of life. You know about this. It's being thrown at you. It's just being rolled out to you. And later on, as you go out into the world, it's a form of cultural capital right? You know, we're in a capitalist society, or most of us are. And capitalist society, everyone thinks like money, but big form of capital is cultural capital. So you having these discussions about certain kinds of art, or knowing Dali, for example, and uh, you know, might make a difference. Or there will be this, well, you kind of learned, you've seen a picture of Dali, but you haven't been to this museum and seen it in person. My God, if you see it in person, that's a totally, you see the brush strokes, you see the, and then that's the image people see, right? Those people, that's who you're being. Oh, you're talking about the brush strokes. And whereas then you might be going there and saying, my God, like he's talking about me, right? Like something like Van Gogh. It's like I had that icon in the video where they're throwing soup at, you know, the sunflowers, which is actually a painting about people who are suffering and have all kinds of challenges, and it's from a voice that's supposed to speak to a certain class of people, but it gets kind of taken over by another class of people. And then all of a sudden there's all this confusion. And from that comes this idea of snobbery and elitism.
Yeah, I think tribalism was one of the best points that Nazarin brought in those comments. It's very, very important to go through that point, especially as it relates to human experience also more widely, how kind of we have often this sheep mentality and how hard it is to kind of realize your own views and who you are as a person. And we kind of have this need that we need to belong to a group, whether it's this snobby group or anti-snobby group, or maybe our group who try to fight against snobbery or whatever group. But tribalism can be very, very toxic, but it's just something that we cannot escape fully. And also you mentioned again the OC, because that's very interesting to look at from the kind of snobbery discussion point of view, as we have the character of Ryan, who comes from an awful background, but then he is kind of goes into this snobby world, and then he slowly learns the rules and the snobby life, and then I mean, I don't want to spoil it too much because I know you haven't seen it, but he kind of gets very used to that life, and in some ways he actually belongs to that rich life better than someone like Marissa, for example, who is from that background, but then she always rejects that kind of snobbery of her background and that stuff. So there's lots of interesting points in the OC about social class and cultural capital and things like that. So it's definitely a show that is worth analyzing. And one thing I always notice about these soap operas in general is that characters who are like very intelligent and they know everything about art, even from like a very young age. It's the same with kind of Rory Gilmore from Gilmore Girls, and Dawson's Creek has some of that too. So it's kind of, it doesn't feel real in that way, because how many 16-year-olds there really are who have kind of gone through like art house cinema and read these classic books like on their free time too, and who are actually really interested in that stuff. But it's really funny how I feel like some of the directors and the screenwriters actually kind of implant themselves in these shows, because they probably were kind of like these kids, so they want to have these kids in these shows. And I often feel like maybe they wanted to be art house directors themselves, but then they couldn't do that. Then they start doing these shows and they want to kind of share their enthusiasm for art house cinema through the characters and stuff like that. That's kind of one of my thesis about these things. Yeah. Because
yeah, you're so right. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. No, keep going.
Yeah, in the OC, they of course mention that you want to have a girls' day in and watch the Decalogue and stuff like that. Like rich girls in California are gonna watch the Decalogue on their free time and stuff like this. Or the character of Seth says that this is the Madame Bovary of martial arts cinema. So there's also that kind of mix of high art and low art of martial arts mixed with Gustav Flaubert's Madame Bovary, which is one of my favorite books. So that's really funny how it works like that. And even in the first season, they actually mentioned Madame Bovary the character of Summer says that in the hospital, when Marissa is in the hospital, that I've read Madame Bovary 5 times, even though Summer is kind of this bimbo character in the first season. So it's kind of a very weird contrast in those things in these shows.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up like two very important points. One is art as a individual expression of aspiration. Maybe what you wish it could have been for you, like you're saying, maybe they're aspiring, they're saying, what if, it was like that in high schools? What would change? And by putting that on there, you can actually inspire someone to follow that. But another point where you're talking about where snobbery comes from, and this point of this Madame Bovary of martial arts cinema, and then this, okay, we're juxtapositioning the two. And for example, me being of Indian descent, for example, when I just mentioned this to my wife, okay, when we were in France and we went to an Indian restaurant, the food wasn't spicy enough because it has to cater to the taste, right, of that particular, of that place. And if I went in there and I said, oh, this food, it's not spicy enough, or there's not enough spices, there's not enough cumin, there's not enough garam masala, no one's going to take that as a snobby comment, right? There's just going to be an Indian complaining that the food is not to his liking. But if you had the opposite, and let's say it's India or somewhere else, and then it's someone French, for example, traditional French, like coming in, tasting the food and say, oh, like this spices is overpowering. It's killing the natural like vibrancy of the vegetables. These guys, they like overpower it with all this spice. That's a snobby comment. But that's very interesting, right? Because snobbery then also goes into this whole world of power as well. Who's making the comment about what, right? Like if someone from China came and said, hey, what is this? What Quentin Tarantino is doing? I mean, this is ridiculous, right? This is like, there was this one thing where Toshiro Mifune, when he was approached to be in Star Wars, he was just like, no, because if I'm Obi-Wan, it's gonna like cheapen the image of a samurai, right? And if it's like reversed, that it could be like, this is a snobby comment now. So there's so many interesting things. what you're mentioning in just that comment, you're already bringing up like two or more like really crucial things. I don't know if we'll even get past the where does snobbery come from topic.
Yeah. Well, one thing we could also talk about is that does the anti-snobbery come from a different place than snobbery? I kind of think it comes from the same place in many ways, that, or it might be, or the kind of, again, the anti-snobbery might come from that kind of inferiority complex, that you think that you see some of these other people like smoking their cigars and listening to classical music and reading Dostoevsky 8 hours a day. So you might think that, yeah, I'm stupid, I cannot do that like those other people do. So it might be that kind of sense of inferiority. But I think that inferiority can even come from the snobby side in a way, that because you feel so different from the not quote unquote normal people, that you feel like I'm such a weirdo freak.
Oh, yeah.
I wish that I was a normal person. I wish that I was like you who go to football games every day and shout there and watch the Transformers films, and I wish that I could like that as much as you guys do, but I like Schopenhauer and I like classical music or whatever. So I think these things are very similar to each other, even though they kind of feel very differently in a way as well, because they kind of direct their hate at very different targets.
But here's a question, right? And I think this is where I feel like both of us come from. If you take, you were talking about Dali. Now, having known some of Dali's work, if you watch Looney Tunes cartoons, you'll probably see Dali-inspired imagery. And so the only gap is that that individual who's seen Bugs Bunny or whatever, which most of us have and love, if someone comes and says, you see that? That's Dali, right? That would be an easy, oh, wow, okay, really? What's Dali? but it's because it's like Dali, and that's art, and that's painting, and that's European, and that's admired by this all, and it costs millions of dollars. And now that's something really cool that just happened where you're okay, that melting clock, you've seen it in Wile E. the Coyote cartoon somewhere. It's actually, it's quite inspired by that, but all of a sudden that's the cartoons, and that has nothing to do with, I don't know, high art. uh, Mindset really is, I feel like, it's like a blocker, right? Whereas it's like, why don't you move? You can move easily. Like, it's not exclusive. And I think what you're saying about the OC or other such shows and writers, you see it in Sopranos and all this. It's always this. They are trying to say there is no barrier. Like, you think it's a barrier, but it's actually invisible, and you can actually traverse as you please. And since I know the target audience here, maybe a particular group, I'm introducing something to you that you might not directly get access to because of all these things that get built around it, the identity politics, the response to, oh well, that's not me, that's them, and all that stuff. And then, we haven't even talked about gatekeepers who want to keep it that way because they can say, this is ours, how dare you try to, I don't know, adapt this to this context, which it's not your context, and it doesn't work. But in early cinema, I think that's what we like as well, is that you do see that where Indian cinema, Japanese cinema, they sit there and they say, you know what, Shakespeare, that's really cool, and I want to adapt it to my context. And then it's something we can all share in, if that snobbery barrier is removed.
Yeah, so many points there to answer, but I think
Sorry.
again, you mentioned Shakespeare, but of course, like, we often think of him now as something like very highbrow and stuff, but he has literally influenced everything that has come since, whether it's theater, film, or literature. So you are in a way watching something Shakespeare-like. Kind of like what you talk about with Dali. And again, I think one other point that kind of relates this is very important is that how someone like, for example, Charles Dickens was like very much like a people's author back then, like the normal man's author, but now he's seen as someone, they study him in English classes in university. He's very difficult classic literature because it's classic literature, but he used to be like just for normal people. And I think Shakespeare, in many ways, from what I've heard, again, I'm not an expert on this field, but during his time was more of that kind of just for the everyman, but now he's seen as something like highly intellectual and very difficult. So it's very interesting how that perception changes throughout the centuries. And you mentioned the Sopranos, so I just started thinking about many of my favorite scenes, even though they don't relate to this. I don't know if you remember the prank call scene from the 4th season when Ralph calls police.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes of all time. Yeah, it's so funny. I remember some of the lines, but they aren't very appropriate, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How do I put this delicately? Yeah. But yeah, The Sopranos is such a great show.
And it's like what you said, like Sopranos, that's inspired by Shakespeare, 100%. You have all these jester characters like Ralph that are really upsetting the status quo by being on the side of chaos and kind of, stripping pretenses and, challenging rules and all that. It's like, like you said, we could, I guess we're off topic and we're not even talking about films anymore, but I see your point about all this.
And The Sopranos obviously has been influenced by lots of pretty like hardcore psychoanalysis and psychology and philosophy that isn't like very accessible for the normal person, but for some reason normal people can still very much relate to The Sopranos, even though it's a very dense show, very complex show in many ways. So it's very interesting also how masses can sometimes kind of really connect with some of this like more difficult art, but then sometimes they kind of throw it out of the window like immediately and don't even give it a chance. But sometimes they just find this maybe like one show or one movie that is very intellectual that they can get to. So that kind of shows me that, again, most people have the potential to get into art, but it's just something that maybe you just need the right person to mentor you or recommend them to you. Obviously, Parasite is a very artsy film in many ways, but again, many people connected to that. But maybe most of those people still aren't into kind of art house cinema in general. So why is that? That's kind of very interesting question, I think.
I mean, you're absolutely right, and you touched on this in your videos, and then also Ramon, Dutch film buff, brought it up in his comment, right, where you're talking about Parasite, and you're saying, yeah, it became this kind of popular symbol, and all of a sudden it's like birth of Korean cinema. But of course, Korean cinema has been around for a while, and it in itself has its own challenges coming out of the shadows of like Japanese cinema, and saying we are our own, kind of we have our own unique, art as well and perspectives in film. And it gets there by this thing that Ramon mentioned, that you mentioned in the video, which is, oh, this category, best foreign film, or the best foreign film to win best film, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, foreign cinema has just arrived. And I have to admit, I was a part of that, because not in Parasite, because okay, my journey started a bit earlier, but growing up in Canada and stuff, I didn't realize, even now I'm discovering, it's blowing my mind how much cinema there is from these different countries. You'd kind of hear a sprinkling of these few titles. You must watch this, you must watch that, and you think, oh yeah, well, in France there's maybe 10 great films, and it's like, no, they're like hundreds. And then it just, whoa, like what happened? How come I never heard about it? And then I'm sure you're going to talk about a lot of things related to all that, of why that is the case and whatnot. But yeah, like what you're saying about Parasite, so interesting, right? It's not snobbish to like Parasite, I don't think. There might be for some groups of people, but generally it's accepted as a form of popular cinema, which is not popular cinema, actually. It's the reception that makes it popular.
And I've even noticed in the past few years there have been some other types of like fairly difficult films that have gotten quite lots of like mainstream appreciation, like Drive My Car, for example, has been really popular, and I think it won the Oscar for the best foreign film. And we of both of us really love that film, but I think it's obviously a 3-hour art house film about quite difficult topics, but it seems to be something that even the bit more kind of average moviegoer can get into, at least based on the amounts of ratings that you see, like Letterboxd and stuff. So that's interesting. But I think it was such a big moment when Parasite won the Oscar, just like you said. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the Oscars because I think they often celebrate mediocre cinema, and I don't like the way how they separate the foreign and the American. I think if they really knew their cinema, most of the time it would be a foreign film winning Best Picture. Not always, but most of the time. And I think if we think about the 2010s, I think probably for the most of the years, I think a foreign film should have won the Best Picture. Maybe Whiplash is one that I could see being like an American film that is worthy of like being the best film of the year. But I think for the most years, I would definitely go with foreign cinema.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And of course, I too always had problems with this foreign category, right? Because in my house, to preserve culture, growing up, you're watching, Bollywood, which is the Indian film industry, which again suffers from similar problems to Hollywood. But one challenge I had, for example, you would have is, first of all, you would almost never see an Indian film there. And if it ever showed up, for example, the year where it was Lagan was there, and so was Amelie, it's like, well, Amelie is going to win, right? And they're such different films, and they mean such different things symbolically, that to kind of sit there and say, oh yes, this is the best one, is to, what, going back to that restaurant example, is choosing a form of what is elite, and what is elite you can't always even judge unless you understand even the context. And this is one of the things that you constantly bring up, is that's part of the barrier, right? That when you go, the barrier and the gift, when you go and you watch that cinema, it you have to put in some work sometimes and say, okay, why this perspective? What period is this talking about? What historical period? What was going on in this country? And that's the gift, right? It completely opens your mind, and can be so healing. But it's work sometimes, and then that becomes the block. Why, if I'm on this track, I just want to be on this track? And I don't know. My question is not just about Snobbery, but I'm saying overall well-being, or overall, what we aspire to in society. Will it get achieved by just being on this track, and you're just being moved along that track? Don't look here, don't look here, don't look up, don't look down, don't look back. What does that do to you, as a person? Forget about where you stand in socially, but you personally, what do you think? Do you gain from that, or is you're losing something, by that?
I think your point would be a good kind of segue into the benefits of art appreciation topic.
Yeah,
because again, I mean, there's so many things that we can get from art. Obviously, it could take like 10 hours to go through all of them, but we'll see if we can kind of sum it up. I think Tony, for example, when I was kind of reading some of the comments again from a couple of months ago, mentioned that it gives us the ability to deal with our emotions, to become more sensitive, and can learn more about others, and we kind of lose that the othering that we utter other people. So you are you, I am me, but we kind of lose that, and we kind of realize that we are all humans. We are all good and bad, beautiful and ugly, and we realize that we all are, again, pretty much the same, even though we have some differences as well. Again, the human experience is universal and particular at the same time. So I think Tony mentioned many good points there, but with you, we talked about lots of the kind of self-empathy and also empathy for others. But the self-empathy is something that maybe people don't often talk about, that we just kind of can understand ourselves better when we explore art and see characters that are similar to us. Again, like I talked about in the 10 movies that remade me challenge, especially with the queer cinema, I talked about that a lot, how that kind of really helped me to understand myself and become more accepting of myself. And I know this team is, again, like very important for you as well, and we have very similar backgrounds like we talked about, but this is the self-empathy and the empathy is are the two things that kind of interest me the most about this topic.
I mean, absolutely. Like that, you're like right there. I mean, when I see empathy and self-empathy, when you made that point about self-empathy, that really, I was like, really it really resonated with me. And there, because we're always looking at the other part, right? To have empathy for those different experiences and whatnot. But we never really realize that when we do that, that's the easier part, which you mentioned, even your comment to me. That's the easier part. And then the harder part is then the mirror turns around on yourself, and then you start gaining an understanding and empathy for yourself. And this whole even self-reflection thing, I was thinking about that term, and I was like, okay, there's self-reflection where, okay, I'm sitting there and I'm reflecting about this or that topic. But then there's reflection of the self, as in, if you have no art, or for example, everything you're consuming, you don't see yourself in, like truly, right? Because there's the how you'd like to see yourself. That's a totally different thing, right? Maybe you want to fancy yourself to say, oh, that to be James, I'm like James Bond, right? And that sort of thing. But the true self, right? The vulnerable, like, and you brought up so many of these points in your videos. One is that vulnerable self. One is that self that's, well, never gonna be, or it's gonna be very difficult for you to be a particular image. So if you don't have yourself there, not in all cinema, because all art has different purposes, but at least in some of it, how will you ever really gain an understanding and acceptance of yourself, or an understanding of your struggles or your challenges? And this comment about Tony, what Tony brought up is, yeah, you see it and you see, okay, we have challenges in common, but you see people solving those problems differently with a mindset that you didn't even think of having, right? Uh, you are always looking at it, maybe solving this problem from the I perspective. And sometimes, for example, like certain Japanese cinema will blow your mind because they resolve the problem not from the I perspective, but to actually shatter the concept of I. And that's how they overcome that. Now, if you didn't have any exposure to that, and you were only watching cinema that's like, you resolve it with the I thing, I stood up, I trained harder, I ate better, I did this, I did that, you will never have that. And you may be against a wall, and you'll be doing everything that I can do, and you will have never thought that there's something beyond the I perspective to solving that problem, perhaps.
Yeah, kind of it's a very serious topic, but I kind of started thinking about some of the jokes as well at the same time. Like when you said that again, seeing ourselves in the films, I was just thinking how probably Tony sees himself in the fourth season of the OC with that French intellectual guy, how they are so similar. But again, I shouldn't always go back to the OC, but I cannot stop thinking about the OC. I'll go back to the serious stuff again.
But since you say this about the OC, I think, yeah, you definitely can. So this is a funny anecdote, but when I was in university, we had a Greek classic literature course, and we're talking about the Iliad, and the professor would, everything he would associate back to the Big Lebowski. And he'd be like, it's like in the Big Lebowski, and he'd always be laughing. And it made me watch the Big Lebowski, so I hadn't watched it. But this is what you're saying too, right? Like, you're connecting back to the OC, but then that helps you bridge that gap too, right? That there's nothing different about that and the OC, or there's nothing blasphemous about talking about Homer and seeing Homer in the Big Lebowski. And ironically, the Coen brothers seem to use a lot of like Homer and the Iliad and Odyssey in a lot of their films in interesting ways. So you can always bring it back to the OC. I think it's always interesting to hear it through one piece of art, for example.
Margit Zero. Am I the only one who gives a shit about the rules? Margit Zero. I just had to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, such a great script. But yeah, now I'll go back to the serious stuff. So I think there's some maybe kind of problem with the self-empathy in the way that you can kind of become too self-obsessed when you watch art, that you only look it kind of through this very kind of rigid lens of yourself, and you don't maybe get the other empathy if you are too obsessed about yourself. So I think there's this kind of a potential harm there if you get too obsessed about your own experiences too, even though I really love to, again, watch cinema from a kind of my own individual perspective and try to relate to it through my own experiences, both bad and good. But sometimes I think that it can also make us kind of dwell on those things too much, and I've kind of noticed it sometimes myself, especially more recently when I go to these times when I just always go through this like huge periods of self-reflection, and how kind of toxic it can become if it kind of overtakes your life in a way. So sometimes it's good to also remove yourself in a way and try to focus on the empathy for the other people and try to think about other people and not just obsess about your self experience, even though the self empathy is very important.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think this could be a whole topic in itself, because there's so much great art, but especially cinema, even on this topic, like you said, and a lot of cinema that you share, and that even we connect over, because it does do that. It like neatly takes a protagonist and puts them in a very I world, and self-absorbed, and then all of a sudden there's like an absolute shattering, and for some people, or even me, it can be disorienting, right? All of a sudden, how did we go from this problem to another problem? It almost seems like there's no connection. But yeah, that removal of self-absorption. So you're absolutely right. There's all these different aspects, right? There's self-absorption, and then there is that expansion of your perspective in that self-absorption. There might be things in yourself that you need to actually heal, that you're not paying attention to, trying to heal other aspects. And you've brought that up in so many of your videos as well, that there's a self-absorption, but there's a self-absorption that's limited to certain things, because you're trying to fit in, for example, and be accepted, or that's where you're supposed to reflect, and you're not looking at the unattended part of things that may require some attention in healing. So everything you share, like this is the reason why. And and as we share this, you see more and more how this thing starts getting broken down. What does snobbery have to do with any of that?
Yeah.
If you really think about it.
Yeah. Well, of course, snobbery in another way is also about kind of being obsessed about yourself, in a way, about your taste. So I guess it's when you think about yourself, again, it kind of comes back to that point that I just made about thinking about yourself too much, or thinking too much of yourself. Again, kind of thinking that you are the God among men just because you watch all those great films, even though it is kind of insignificant in the end, no matter how beautiful art is. Yeah. But do we have anything else to say about this particular topic, or should we move on to other topics? Or
Yeah, no, let's keep it moving. I digress a lot, as you can see, even in my own videos. So I'll digress, and then we'll stay away from the structure. So you maintain the structure. You're the host. I'll digress. So feel free to also rein me in, because that's just my style. I go here, I go there, and then I'll disorient you and everyone else.
yeah. Well, I mentioned to you about in the kind of pre-talk that we should talk about kind of humor, about snobbery, and the kind of funny side of kind of pretending to be a snob, and how people can sometimes maybe mistake me, for example, for being like really snobby just because I kind of all the time make these jokes, and sometimes I might say that I don't like that as I'm such an elitist or something like that. But I of course make those types of comments tongue in cheek, again, as humor. But I think again, people sometimes cannot read when you are being funny or not funny, especially as I have this bit more kind of dry and Finnish type of sense of humor, that you might not get it as it is kind of this more introverted and mellow type of humor. But I think it's one of my favorite things. Like I do this with Tony all the time, and also with you in the comment section, that we make fun of our snobbiness and pretentiousness when like Tony starts talking about these high level concepts that he has read in like Schopenhauer or whatever, and it's always so much fun to talk about that stuff. But I just kind of wanted to clarify that when I'm being snobby, it's usually kind of out of a kind of funny place and humorous place, and not totally serious place. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think like Solitary Ronin does a good job of that too, because I remember even with the 10 movies that remade me, his response, he was doing a little bit of that too. He's like, yeah, much of what he's saying was over my head. Like, I don't know what he's talking about. And, I thought that was hilarious, right? Like, it's like, we all need that, because at the end of the day, by doing that, we also preventing what you're saying, that self-absorption and that attaching too deeply with a particular thing. So, for you, like you say, oh, OCs are like something that you connect with that does that. For me, it was always like the show Frasier does that. They're snobs, but they're psychiatrists, but they are like not above the exact issues that they're trying to treat in their patients, and they're petty, and and that snobbery for snobbery's sake, and all those things that come up in that show. And it's like, yeah, you have to have a laugh about it, but I do agree with you that even in the comments, sometimes I wonder if someone's reading that, it may sound like we are, you're congratulating yourself for being, yeah, well, I'm so great, because it's what you said about the French character, right? Like, oh, I went to the Hume exhibit, but even I was impressed, like, because that's such a loaded, funny comment, right? Coming from someone French, and what they think about, I don't know, philosophers that are not French, for example, and whether Scotland or the United Kingdom is actually cultural or even European enough, and all these things that just come up that are hilarious. But yeah, sometimes it can come across the wrong way, right? Where it's, oh, you're insulting, right? That's not insulting Hume. It's actually making fun of the snob.
Yeah.
And
I always try to do it in a kind of, I don't want to say poetic way, but in that kind of language that makes it seem that it's definitely humor and not anything else. Because I, of course, often say that, like, we snobs have to navigate through the oceans of mass morality and things like that. Again, I think for a comment like that, you should definitely see that it's humor and not anything else. But I guess somebody might even take a comment like that seriously. Or when I talk about post-divine snobbery and things like this, post-divine is a kind of a stupid comment that I've or stupid kind of term that I've come up with a few years ago. Post-divine snobbery.
Yeah, I mean, the humor in that is that post-divine. What does it even mean?
No, right. I guess to me it kind of means that it's even more divine than divine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, this is the thing. When you translate the humor, when you write that, it always makes me laugh, right? And it's like, but when you try to say, oh, well, it means this, and then, it's like you have to explain to people, see, again, now that sounds snobby again, right? Oh, I'm explaining to the people this and that, right? And it's really hard because you don't mean it that way, but I think it's a symbol of today. There's an over scrutinization of everything, right? Like everything is a point of, oh, this person said that, therefore they think this and they think that. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And it's like you miss the humor, and if without the humor, it's not fun, anymore, and it becomes too serious and becomes too personal. But I've never thought you meant that way, and all this stuff. When you, I mean, do you remember these videos that I remember like discovering your channel for the first time, and used to do these like 45-minute, and you'd be like going through all these films like I've never heard of, right? Yeah. It was just so amazing. It was like film after film after film after film after film. And I just found that like so great, right? But but at the same time, you're doing it because you're having fun. You weren't doing that because it was like, hey, I'm up here and I'm sprinkling, wisdom to the masses, the ignorant masses, and I'm here. I've come from the mountain.
Yeah. I'm a post-divine being, and you should bow down beneath my feet. Yeah. And I think Tony came up with this great kind of concept, which is inner snob moments. He talks sometimes that he has these inner snob moments when he, for example, watches a film, like a French film, where they talk about Sartre and maybe Camus or Schopenhauer or something. And he kind of gets this inner snob moment because he knows all the references, so that makes him feel so good that he gets all those philosophy references when the normal people don't. So you kind of get that sense of, I'm so good because I've read Schopenhauer, I've read Dostoevsky's Crimes and Punishment and everything like that. But obviously that's also just fun. But I also get those sometimes when I'm reading like a 19th century French book that just has that kind of French language, that very kind of overly sophisticated perfectionist language, and I talk about like art and philosophy, and then when I'm enjoying it, I kind of get that good sense of feeling that, yeah, I must be pretty smart. But of course, it's still in a fun way, not too seriously. Yeah.
I'm not at your guys' level yet. I still feel like a Philistine. If I get a reference, I'm like, wow, I got a reference. Like I'm like telling my wife, did I just get that reference? Even a film reference, sometimes I'll be like, oh, this is a reference to this film. Like, and then I feel like so proud of myself. Oh, I finally identified something, because I hear you guys, and I love it. So I hear you guys like talking, even these discussions you guys have, the round tables on the deck, it just blows my mind, right? And I can't see half of it. And then it's like, whenever I get it, it's like, yeah, you do get that inner snob point, right? You say, yeah, I got something, or this is so like, I don't know, Kafka-esque.
Yeah.
And then you
or
feel
Brechtian or something like that. Yeah. Kafkaesque or Brechtian, or these kind of great Shakespearean, Lynchian, whatever. But I think I could read out this Charles Bukowski quote. I read this out to Altaz before we started recording, but it goes like this: wherever the crowd goes, run in the other direction. You're always wrong. I think that's kind of like a textbook snobbery, even though I kind of agree with it. The contrarian in me agrees with this, that often the masses are wrong, whether it's about politics or whether it's about films or music or whatever. But I think it's just kind of a nice 2 sentences that really sums up what being a snob and what being a contrarian means. And Charles Bukowski was quite the character. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole yeah, I mean you can see that, right? Like it like creates the whole you can see the mobs gathering, if that you're not going to go along with this, and then you got to run the other way. But yeah, the contrarian thing is it's very very interesting and quite funny, and I do believe that, yes, like that's often right, that you should think of going the other way, just because,
But where can you run when you have to be in the middle of the oceans of mass morality? There is nowhere you can run. There is nowhere you can swim, because the oceans are all over you. So I don't know if this quote is very accurate, because you cannot escape this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and again, right, everyone goes to their favorite art things, and for me, yes, Frasier is like the best thing with Snobbery, because he's this guy, right? He's like Harvard educated. So his dad was a police officer, but his wife was his mother was a psychiatrist and all that. And so he goes and he becomes a psychiatrist, and Harvard educated, and he runs this radio show with like pop psychology. So people are calling in to have their problems solved, right? And then he often goes into this, Schopenhauer once said, da 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 da, and that means like absolutely nothing, right? So you know where that's going to lead. That person's just going to be like, huh, right? But that's the whole, what we're talking about. It's like when you get to that point, in some ways you're the joke, actually, right? Not so much that's the joke, even though people focus on say, oh, the joke is the masses, or mass morality, as you call it, and it's really you, because you're the one. It doesn't look like that from a general perspective. You're the one who's sitting there trying to, I don't know, quote something that no one knows what you're talking about. So it's highly isolating too, right? And I think that's why even when Tony comments and stuff, it's just a medium to kind of share in that joke, right? That you're sitting there and you're thinking of it this way, but no one really cares about what you think anyways. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I was making that whatever love in Germany, I was like, who cares about this, right? Like who's really gonna be like, oh, what are these three are you theories. It's ridiculous. You're just like talking to yourself at that point. But it's nice when it's like you're not talking to yourself and someone actually comments. It's like this, oh, okay, I wasn't just talking to myself into a camera. Someone else thought about it.
And it's really weird for me, for example, to do like music related videos because people know me more for the films and cinema. So much of my viewer base are cinephiles, but they might not be music nerds. So they cannot like really relate to the fact that I listen to all these different genres, no matter how weird they are, because many people are these people that they maybe have like one art form that they really care about, but they aren't into many different art forms, which is completely different from me, who tries to explore lots of different types of art. But yeah, obviously I'm happy that people they can watch whatever videos they want from me, whether it's the cinema, music, or both. But yeah, I think it can be sometimes hard to connect with people due to the fact that they might only be into the cinema but not into music and stuff. So that's why it was really fun to talk with Solitary Ronin, for example. So I finally was able to talk with somebody about music too here on YouTube, because my collaborations at that point had only been about films. So it was really nice to talk about music as well.
Yeah, I think it's like so I mean, interesting, and I'm glad, like, when you started doing the music videos, I really enjoyed that, the painting stuff, even Solitary Ronin, starting the vinyl project video and all that. I think that's really great, and that's, one thing that I found a bit that I didn't quite understand, that why it's such a kind of controlled space. Like,
Yeah.
if you're talking about films, you shouldn't. Well, why are you talking about music? Because you're supposed to talk about films. And I don't know. It's like it's just expressing it's different forms of expression or ideas that connect across, right? Like, what's wrong with maybe you will now explore a piece of music because it has some, interesting thematic things that, from like related to a film or something like that. I don't know. Right? Because there's lots of those conversations that could be had, right? A book and a film, not even necessarily an adaptation of the book to film, but just what one book has to do with, one film, for example. Like, I think those are kind of like, it's just a form of stretching exercise, right? You're connecting things, and that's how we're supposed to learn. And I recognize that I sound like a complete snob saying that, so I'll rein it in a bit.
I think part of this topic is the fact that often most successful YouTubers say that in order to be successful in YouTube, you need to have your own niche. You need to have a focus on one thing. So maybe that comes from there, that I should only focus on film, or somebody else only on music or politics or whatever. But again, there's this idea that everybody should just have his own niche. But I think that's kind of boring, because it's like films in the overall, it's just such a small part of who I am, because I like so many other things. And even though I talk about so many of my different hobbies on my channel, there are many of my hobbies that I don't touch at all. So I have even more hobbies. So yeah, but that's one of the reasons I also connect with people like you and Tony, is that we all kind of aren't just into cinema, but we are, let's say, hardcore intellectuals in general, that we like all these different types of things, whether it's painting, books, or music, or cinema, or philosophy, or whatever.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you're saying, and this goes back to your contrarian things. All right, you get this advice: if you want success on YouTube, do this. And I kind of, in some ways, feel it should go contrarian. Like, try to be like not successful on YouTube. Like, do all those things that you think are not going to be successful at all, right? Like this discussion, I don't know who's going to watch. They'll probably watch it for you, but I mean, I don't know. But yeah, but at the same time, when you're talking about massive channels, right, like PewDiePie, right?
Yeah.
He talks about Mishima.
Yeah.
At times. So why is that okay? I don't know. He talks about video games and he talks about Mishima. I don't know. Why does that work? I have no idea. So it's very strange how it works, and I think it's the algorithm gods as well. But it's also about appearances. How you're maybe coming across. So maybe we just come across as crazy. I don't know. So it's like less interesting.
It's actually weird that my most viewed video is the one that talks about the albums that cured my music elitism.
Yeah.
That's why my most viewed video has to be about elitism and snobbery. Like it's just so funny because that video, for some reason, that I think the algorithm picked it up a little bit and recommended it to random people. So that's why it became the most viewed video. But it's just kind of fun that for a person like me, the most viewed video is about snobbery and elitism.
Yeah, and it's like it's also fascinating to say that now jazz is a form of elitist music. Yeah. Because jazz was anti-elitist music, right? It was fighting to get recognition because it was seen as, well, this is not classical music. They're not even writing it down. I mean, what are they really even doing? So, and now it's this, if you like jazz, you're some sort of elite, right? You're sitting there with your single malt in a, with a round ice cube, and you've got your $5,000 record player, right? Like, sitting in an all glass living room, and all right, I mean, that's hardly the case, and it's not even where jazz comes from. But I think it's all very it's all very funny, and I really don't understand what exactly works or doesn't work. I just think, yeah, some of these conversations are interesting to have, and but I don't know how all that stuff works with elitism and format and specialization and all that. I just love poking my nose into things where, like, it's this not supposed to go.
Yeah. Well, I think Tony will be contributing so much to this as well. So if we missed something, he will mention it, and he will bring his pretentious, very elitist, very snobby self to this talk and give us some great comments that anti-snobs can get angry about and we snobs can laugh at.
And then he can talk about what his favorite Chekhov is, and his favorite Russian authors, and his favorite books by them, and the best translation of those relative books, and all the stuff Tony loves talking about, and the OC.
Yeah, and Gilmore Girls and Dawson's Creek.
Gilmore Girls.
He loves those as well. And Buffy the Vampire Slayer, he's very passionate about that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. He recommended it to me, so yeah.
I've never watched any of those, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, you should someday. But of course, you should prioritize going through some like Japanese films and stuff before like Dawson's Creek or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about being more snobbish. So when I went into university, right, after the whole high school experience, I took time off. Then I went back to uni. Then I went into this mode where I was like, you should exclude all what is junk, right? And so these shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like Gilmore Girls, they had just come on TV. So I had this big reactionary thing, like, don't let your mind be colonized by these things, because they are not important and they're just distractions. So I had this big reactionary response to those things. And I can laugh at myself now, but a lot of people were like, yeah, what is he on about? Like, why does this guy have like such a problem with, like, I don't know, Friends, which I still have a problem with Friends, by the way. But we won't get into that because that would take hours of my problems with Friends. But, you just develop your identity around those things. And now I've relaxed differently in saying, no, you have to take each thing in itself and what it's trying to do. And, and you can still not like it. There's no.
I think some of the best days I've ever had were those like very intellectual days when I listened to a couple of jazz albums, maybe some classical music. Then after that, I read a little Dostoevsky and a little Schopenhauer. And then after that, I watched maybe like a Japanese New Wave film or a Godard film or something. Like, it's those days when you do kind of it all, that you engage with very difficult music, very difficult cinema, and read classic literature. Like, again, you get a certain type of high from that. But it's quite a lot of fun, and you can get those inner snob moments from that Tony, aka Peaches, always talks about.
Yeah. Exactly.
But at the same time, I just rewatched the Rennie Harlin film the other day of The Covenant, which is one of the worst films of all time. so I can mix it up too. Yeah.
So what made you want to watch that one? Were you revisiting it, or I've never seen this film, so
Yeah, it's a childhood favorite of mine that I always kind of talk about it a lot because it's so funny in a very bad way. Yeah, yeah. So it's such an awful movie, but kind of funny at the same time. It has lots of great dialogue, like Harry Potter can kiss my ass. When it's about these teenage witches, and you have to use their powers. So then they go just Harry Potter can kiss my ass. Or then they say in a classroom that Dreamcatcher was the shit. So it's a Stephen King book, but then the teacher says that we are actually gonna talk about The Shining. Yeah. Yeah, but it's an utterly awful movie, but kind of funny. And it's very dated already, even though it's from 2006.
yeah, it's always interesting, like revisiting something that you loved at certain periods, and then you kind of watch it and you're a bit confused. Like when you guys did the whole Martin Scorsese thing, and it just made me want to watch Gangs of New York. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna watch this. I remember this movie being great, so I'm gonna watch it. And then I put it on and I just see like, oh, okay. I it's I didn't see it like that at that time, right? I didn't even see that. Okay, DiCaprio's accent is completely strange, and all these things that were in there. And so it's always really funny because you go and revisit, and sometimes you can already be in defense, right? A part of me was like, nah, man, these guys are wrong. I'm gonna rewatch this because I remember this being great. I'm ready. And then it's like you go and watch it, and then you're like, oh, they're right. This is
Well,
not that great.
shout out to The Departed.
Yeah, I'm very afraid to watch that movie again.
Yeah. I'm shipping up to Boston. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm a sailor spec, and I've lost my leg. Yeah, such a great song.
But
So,
it's also Scorsese. He it's like he's having a laugh while he's trying to do something serious. Have you noticed that with him? Like I think that's also in Gangs of New York. There's a part where it's almost like uh what would you say? Almost, I wouldn't say patronized, but he's laughing. I feel like he's laughing at some of his characters and what they're doing. And that's a very much a part of his cinema, whether it's Goodfellas, whether it's whatever. There's a part where he's like you can almost feel like he's chuckling, and then that can be a very hit and miss strange feeling, right? Because
yeah.
I don't know if I think it almost like he intentionally made The Departed very exaggerated. Like that was his thing. Let's push it. Let's make the accents like super exaggerated. Let's, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mind the accents as much, but I mean, Ronin always talks about the Boston accents, how awful they are. But I mean, Mark Wahlberg. How could someone think that was a good idea to have a character like that? Like, it's just absolutely atrocious, like awful character. I just cannot stand Mark Wahlberg. Like, I absolutely despise his acting. But
But
yeah,
I mean, oh my, Mark Wahlberg is a whole entity in itself, right? Because his whole downfall came a little bit after Saturday Night Live started like making fun of him, right? Like they did that skit, like what was he? He's like, "Hey, chicken," and in his doing his mannerisms, and he got like it became this whole thing when they were like bringing him down. But I think like at the time, it's like Wahlberg continued his Wahlbergism, so it's like now you see all this Wahlberg, and it's just him like doing that in like various different contexts. But at that time, I don't. that's why I'm scared to revisit that movie, because at that time you were kind of thought, haha, that's kind of funny, right? This guy's absolutely ridiculous. Like the way he talks, it is ridiculous. There's nothing like you could really imagine. Is there actually a guy who would do that? And that's where I feel like Scorsese has this thing where he's like having a laugh with, right? Where he's like, this guy's so dialed up, so exaggerated and silly, but now it's like associated with Wahlbergisms as well, and then it could play as annoying. So I'm very frightened to revisit that movie and see it kind of no longer like as I saw it before. But what do you think about Nicholson in there? Because I think Ronan was mentioning that he thinks that's bad Jack, but I don't necessarily think so.
Yeah, I think Nicholson is the one redeeming quality about the Departed. I was just gonna say one thing about Mark Wahlberg. It's weird how he, in Boogie Nights, he was a porn star, but then later on his career, he has gone into playing like scientist characters who thinks that Mark Wahlberg is like a scientist, like in that Transformers movie, like when he hanging out with Optimus Prime and stuff, and he's some kind of scientist. And I think in the film,
have you seen all the Transformers movies?
Not all of them. I think the first 4 or 5.
You're braver than I am. That first one, I was like, they destroyed my childhood. I was like, why did they make this into a movie? The cartoon was so much better.
Yeah, but I was still a kid when the first 3 came, so I kind of liked them. But I was also a huge fan of some of the like cartoons and stuff. There was this one in like early 2000s called Transformers Armada, which I really loved that one a lot. I actually rewatched it once, like in my late teens, and kind of still hold up. Well, I think you can actually watch that on YouTube. Someone has uploaded some of the episodes, but it's kind of Transformers is kind of cool stuff. I also had some of the comics and stuff. I have lots of nostalgia for Transformers.
Oh, I love this Transformers as well. Like, I mean, it's huge nostalgia as a kid and all that. And those films, like I said, I was already like what, 24 when Transformers, the first one came out with Shia LaBeouf and like Megan Fox, and I was just like, the whole thing, and it was all like that whole, the teenage fantasy, right? Shia LaBeouf and all and then he's the dork, but then he gets the hot girl, and it's all like dork fantasy, right? And so
well,
that's kind of like
it's kind of like the OC when Seth gets Summer. Kind
but
of
that's funny. But that's so funny though. That's funny. He's like my favorite. He's one of my favorite characters on that, obviously.
Yeah, he's probably the best. And I told this to Tony once that it's weird how he's the nerd, because Adam Brody is actually a pretty good looking guy.
Yeah,
and in a good shape. So I don't think he looks that much like a nerd. It's only that kind of the curly hair that he has in the first season. That's pretty much the only nerdy thing about him. But obviously his personality with the comic book obsession. But he also loves high art. Like there's this one episode late in the first season. You might not have watched it yet, but we have Paris Hilton in that episode.
I haven't seen that yet. No, I haven't.
And Paris Hilton is doing a graduate degree, and she's doing a thesis on Thomas Pynchon and something. And then she asks Seth that are you familiar with Thomas Pynchon's work? And Seth only says that he has read The Crying Lot of 49, which is actually the only one that I have read too. So it's kind of funny.
I've had no Pynchon yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is funny, and I think there's that. You and Tony were picking up on that, right? There's the whole image aspect of it that they're definitely playing on, but it's also funny, right? In high school, one of the things I was interested in is acting and drama, right? And you see that, especially like North American in like United States, like Canada, a lot of people who are attracted to acting are actually not necessarily ones that are attracted that much to how do I say in a non-snobbish way, like education per se, right? It's like an alternate path. Whereas in Britain, I was surprised to see that so many actors, like they actually go to Cambridge or like Oxford and stuff, and then they go into acting and all that. So it's like a total different background. And so you get these, what you're mentioning about Seth's character, like you get these people who are probably like pretty cool and popular in high school, and then they go into acting, and then they're like cast as a nerd. And then so it's like nerds that don't really look like nerds per se. Like this guy would be cool. Like I knew guys like that in high school. I was like, that guy would be cool. Like in my high school, that guy would be cool. Like his look, like you said, his physique, like everything about him doesn't say nerd at all. But then there's the nerd, you could say fantasy. Like you would love to think that's what you look like when you're a nerd.
Yeah.
So that part of it is kind of wish fulfillment stuff. That it works on that level, I guess. But yeah.
It's funny how he's the character, even though he has a very privileged background, but he's the character who kind of fights also against that snobbiness in a way and always makes fun of the Orange County life and that kind of surface level existence that they only care about these parties and stuff, and they aren't even almost like human beings. They are just these stupid people who don't care about anything that actually has any meaning. But also I'm always thankful to Seth because he introduced me to Death Cab. Yeah, that's one of my
Death Cab, yeah.
One of my Transatlanticism is one of the albums that actually helps me a lot when I'm kind of in that self-reflective reflective that we talked about earlier. So wanted to give a shout out to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about that album, yeah, exactly, and that when you started singing too, right? I want you so much closer, that whole part, and that song is really emotional, right? Yeah, that Death Cab. So yeah, definitely, yeah, you get introduced to so many things as well, and you have to look at that part of it. So, but you can I discussed this with Tony too. I think in comments where I was like, yeah, like the writing obviously. People wouldn't be dropping references like that. So that the writers themselves are, themselves nerdy snobs, and they're like, haha, let's make, like you're saying, like, let's make Summer say this. Like where Summer is so self-aware, right? Where she goes, I like a cause or something like that. Like I'm a rescuer. And I was saying to Tony, I was like, there's no way that a Summer would be that self-aware that she could make a joke about it, her own tendency. Like you would have to be quite analytical and be like, oh wow, like I like damaged women, I don't know, and then be able to even like a joke about it, which is exactly what those characters do, and they're like 16, and right, so it's tongue in cheek.
And Summer has one of the best character arcs in the whole show, so you will see her transform
Okay, that's
into
going to be interesting.
different. So yeah, and I kind of first disliked her, but then you kind of grow to love her later on, especially in the first episodes when she's such an like that typical stupid teenage girl, very privileged, and not the smartest out of the bunch, but she grows up to be something different. So I don't want to spoil it too much, but I'll say this: there is one scene in the third season of the OC where she's reading Kierkegaard with Seth. so that's kind of funny. They are reading Kierkegaard in school. Yeah.
But apparently, like that's I think that they're in private school, right? So there's a whole difference, because that's one thing that I was like, how are they learning about all this stuff while in high school? Because even some of the things you read in high school, like in Europe, like what you mentioned, or even my wife, because she's Bulgarian, and she's from like a small town, Bulgaria, and all that. And when she talks about, oh yeah, we're reading this in school, I was like, what? I didn't hear about this till I was like maybe like first year university. And if you're not in arts, basically you could go through your whole university program, you would never have heard of a particular thing, which relates to this topic that you had mentioned as well about intellectuals and art, right? And you're saying there's so many smart people. It has nothing to do with that, right? There can be very, very, very accomplished, like, I don't know, finance professionals, medical professionals who have maybe never encountered Kierkegaard or even know who that is, right? And that doesn't mean that because they don't know Kierkegaard, they're not smart, right? Because they can maybe be excellent brain surgeons.
Yeah.
So
and even on my field of like philosophy and politics, like many people don't know anything about art. it was really shocking to me at first when I got into university, but then I kind of got used to it in the end. But I've also met, like randomly at least, some of these kind of intellectual types. So they are in the university, but for me it was such a shock at first when I had these dreams about the university that it was gonna be like the OC. It was gonna be like these shows where everybody is like an intellectual and all they think about is Dante and Schopenhauer and Miles Davis, etc. Then when you go there and they are listening to Taylor Swift and talking about Marvel movies, it's like such a huge cultural shock. But yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I had the same thing, I think, because we come from that experience, and then you kind of go for like higher education, like post-secondary like education, and then it's this light bulb goes on, right? And then you're like so inspired. So you're like, oh, I'm going into the realm of the most inspired people. Right. And then it's like that. You're exactly right. Like, so that's why even when you mentioned Buffy, I kind of laugh because that's the time I started uni. So it's like you're sitting there and you think, oh, we're going to discuss Kierkegaard. And what do you think about Kierkegaard's like theory of this? And instead, it's like, oh, Sarah Michelle Gellar is so hot, and like this kind of stuff. And Buffy, oh, I love Buffy. And I'm like, this, like, I mean, what's going on, right? I worked so hard. I had to go to community college and all this, turn my life around, turn my and now I got to university and we're not discussing, I don't know, Aristotle, and we're talking about Buffy, and then so I had this big or Gilmore Girls, and I have this reaction, right? That what is this? Like, this is, and then you get into that whole self-snob thing. Like, why aren't we talking about higher things?
Yeah.
And you got to laugh about it too. You got to laugh at yourself a bit and be like, wow, like, yeah, you didn't get it. I mean, that's not what it is. But you get that idea because I was like you watched OC. My idea was like, I watched Frasier, and I was like, yeah, that's the world I'm entering, because it takes place in Seattle and I grew up in Vancouver. So even it looks similar. So I was like, this is it. Like, I'm going to be around like people who are like, Frasier and Niles are going to be around me, and they're, we're going to be talking about, works of art and all this stuff, which, I mean, I was probably like 27 before I even saw like a true, masterpiece work of art, like Calibutt's, like Paris Rainy Day, and like the Chicago Art Institute, and that was a moment. Then you feel like, oh, I've arrived. Now I'm in this world where it's all going to be about high art, and you never quite get there. But it's funny that we still aspire to it.
Yeah, this reminded me of one like funny story from my third year of university. It was still in London, so I mean this is a really snobby moment for me. But we had this kind of, again, after the lectures, we often kind of hanged out with fellow students and stuff. So we were walking, and the other people were talking about Harry Potter, and then they asked me whether I'm into Harry Potter, but I just said that I like art, not products. Because so such a snobby thing to say that Harry Potter is just this capitalist product, but I like the true art. I like art, not products. Yeah, thought they kind of shut up after that. I don't know even how I came up with that. It's just like a second. Usually that type of humor just comes to me when I'm on my own, but that was kind of a nice moment, and I will always remember that.
I mean, that would make me laugh. If someone had said that around me, I'd just thought that's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to see ourselves that way, right? And we all sometimes we all want things and stuff like that. I mean, it's in our natures, and so, sometimes we're gonna like things that are our products, but to have a laugh about it is, I think, is I don't know. It helps you break out of that box, right? To say, okay, yeah, I have that, and I also recognize what it is, and it's it's hilarious.
I remember when I did this day trip to Oxford, and I really love the city. It's like one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to, with the great architecture and all those buildings, but then it has all those like Harry Potter gift shops and stuff, and I was just always looking at, why do these people have to be so obsessed about Harry Potter? Like, I'm just all about the museums and the Oxford University there because it was so beautiful, but no, Harry Potter. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like when you go to Edinburgh and it'll be like, this is where J.K. Rowling, this coffee shop, this is where J.K. Rowling was writing Harry Potter, that sort of thing. And then, you're talking about Hume and all these great philosophers that also come from like Scotland and Edinburgh and stuff like that. And then it's like, let's not talk about that, but let's talk about where Harry Potter was written. But this is just, well, we're in a very different world, I think.
Yeah, and in London, like when I was studying, because in my class there were lots of other international students, so it always weirded me out when they were saying that, yeah, I never went to see the sites in London and stuff like that, that they were just, yeah, we go to the university, we work, we go home, play some video games, but never go see Buckingham Palace or the Big Ben or any of these National Gallery or British Museum. Like, it's so weird to me that some people can live in legendary cities like that, but they aren't interested at all in these like greatest museums on the planet or the greatest architecture or all the kind of art things that you can do in London. Because I was all about that stuff. I like took the bus to central London like several times a week because I just loved walking around there. It was so inspiring to see all these great buildings and again theaters and everything. But then these normal people don't give a shit about that, so it's kind of weird.
Yeah, exactly. Or you take the very activist perspective, right? So you say, oh, these are all like imperialist symbols or colonial symbols. And why should I care about that? And it's about extraction of wealth, which, yeah, I'm not saying that that isn't necessarily the case. It's like that when we said again, like, which, that protest where, you go in, I couldn't believe it, right? Because here you are, and then you're going in a free museum, which is when you look at it, that's anti-snob. If you don't have to pay to walk in to look at that, like that's actual access, right? Whereas in before, you would never see that. No, unless you belong to a certain circle, there's no way you would ever get to even look at it in your life. And the fact that the government takes money out to maintain that is not a form of deprivation, but it's a form of giving, because it's like, yeah, you don't survive on bread alone, or at least that's what you believe, what I believe, that is
Yeah.
a part, that inspiration in that you can get it for free, right? Because if you just go over to Paris, you got to pay. You don't get to, you get to just walk into the Tate. You don't get to just walk into Pompidou. There's an entrance fee. There's already a gap whether who's going to go in there. But yeah, I think that both ways is interesting. One is completely not being interested whatsoever, and another part is completely rejecting it as a whole. But because these are attached to these things, I'm not even gonna pay any attention to it. And it's like, I mean, that's just crazy, right? So you're basically gonna look at no art, because all art is attached to very difficult, controversial things, and has been produced in controversial ways as well, or been acquired in controversial ways. So what you're basically saying, remove all that, and then in that vacuum, what are you going to fill it with? Products.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
even worse, I think, right?
Yeah, it was one of my favorite things about London that you could go there for free, because in Finland museums are pretty expensive actually, but in
Oh, okay,
London
well,
you can go to this like National Gallery, which is probably one of the, well, at least top 5 galleries in the whole world, where you can see for free like Van Gogh, Da Vinci, Rubens, all these like greatest painters of all time, and those paintings are literally worth like tens of millions of euros and stuff, or pounds. So it's insane that you wouldn't even go there once. Like I went there all the time. Same with like British Museum, and one of my favorites was the Natural History Museum, which is such a beautiful building in Kensington. And yeah, so there is those science museums there too if you aren't into art, but people don't care about that either. So yeah.
yeah, it's like you can walk in there like any time. And I remember even when this came out, Skyfall, right? And in that they have James Bond sitting there looking at J.W. Turner's uh, painting, right, and talking about it with someone. And of course, we'd like to imagine that James Bond can also talk about art. But to
Yeah.
me, I found that scene so inspiring. And at that time, I wasn't even in the UK, and even now, I don't live in London. But I always think about, oh, how wonderful that was, that you can walk in anytime, sit in front of a painting any day you want, whatever your mood. Like, you know, you're talking about music that uplifts you. Like, you can do that. You could feel down, you could feel depressed, you can go and you can basically look at paintings by other people who are depressed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an inspiring feeling, and I can imagine
A little
if you go.
depression humor, but you know, we mean
Yeah,
it in good spirits. We're not making fun of depression.
yeah,
We know what it is. So
yeah. But I can imagine, like, I've never been to Italy, for example, but going to Florence or Venice or Rome or places like that, like how inspiring it must be to be like next to that architecture, like that cathedral in Florence. I don't know if you know it, but it's such a beautiful building like that. Those buildings are just, they give you this kind of sense of wonder, and you realize that, oh, humans maybe aren't as awful as I thought they are, because they can do something so beautiful as this. That's so inspiring, and I cannot wait that in the future I hopefully can visit Italy and Japan and all many great places in Europe and elsewhere in the world, because it's so inspiring and interesting to see all the different culture and art and everything. Yeah.
exactly. And since we're also interested in cinema, and so much cinema explores this, is that question, right? When you stand by it, who are these people? Right? What did they think? Did they think exactly what you thought? You know, what did they see differently, or whatever? Just having those thoughts, and then it's the same thing that you're saying, right? About certain world cinema being boring, or you know, I like history, so history is boring, right? If I go there, okay, these are this is history, this is boring, but it's not. It's you, like, to think, right? That these are, you know, people who are there doing these things. What made them do that, right? What made that matter? And I think even Tony mentions Caravaggio a lot as well. I think he's one of his favorites, and your favorites too, I think, right?
Yeah, I like Caravaggio. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, you know, when I learned a little bit more about him, I'm not saying I'm any expert on art at all, but just learning a little bit about his background, it's just blows your mind, right? That what was that person experiencing as an individual? What were they wrestling with? What were they questioning uh, when they did that? It's not anything but boring. I mean, but yeah, it becomes that way in that current conception that, oh, okay, this is boring, or this is too far away. It has nothing to do with me, because I now can, I don't know, I don't know, watch all the short form video I want. And I think that's part of a bit of the challenge, that it still has everything to do with us. In my view, it's still fully relevant. All those questions, you're still having those same questions they were having, and that having that connection can really be profound, like you're saying, like just walking through. I haven't had those experiences. I've yet to go to Italy and all these places, but it's a dream, just because you can just sit there. You don't have to even, and just be like, who are these people, and or who have been all these people over so many generations, or, you know, what was it like to have this place, and then it's bombs are falling from the sky. And you know, getting back to our topic, I mean, that's what you get, people wrestling with when you watch even some Polish cinema, or, you know, German cinema. It's like this: we had this, and then we had bombs falling out of the sky, and we were just destroying all this art, and, you know, what does it mean? And then we were committing acts that we can't even imagine. And have we always been this brutal? That was there something that changed? You know, the whole "got a light" thing from Lynch, and what he did, right, with the Alamos project. I mean, I felt that was more profound than when I went to see Oppenheimer, because what he was trying to, as weird as that all that stuff is, it's like, there's this essence of a question in there, right? What did something get released that we can never take back when we decided to go that far? You know, and those, you know, those, this is what I feel like we both kind of, and many, you know, of us, that we have these discussions, what we live for, those moments where you can really have questions that, you know, shake your whole world up.
I remember how inspiring it was even to go to a place like BFI South Bank, because it had that kind of intellectual snobby air, there and all that kind of post-divine snobby body fluids everywhere because you have those great people there everywhere. So it always kind of felt like that. I wish that I was like more social and I could talk to these people because they are clearly, these are the higher race. These are the great
The
snobs
realms
of
of the
the world.
gods.
Yeah,
You're in the
post-divine
realms
gods,
of
the
the
people
gods.
who are even more divine than the gods themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
But
remember this even when I haven't been to BFI South Bank, and I only just been once to Curzon when they did the retrospective of the three colors, and I remember it being a triple bill, and I feeling like, you know, when you mentioned when you have those days where you do like challenging things throughout the day and
yeah.
you feel a sense of satisfaction. I bought that ticket and I thought, I can't do that. I can't watch like three, Kieslowski. I like Kieslowski, but can I watch like three back to back? Like, it's like, and watching that whole trilogy back to back and walking out, it's like, it's what you're saying. As much as it's funny too, you do feel like, oh my God, you're in the realm of the gods, because when you come out of there, it's like, I don't know, it's like rebirth, right? Like you're coming out of this womb of like inspiration, and then you're just like, wow, like I can't believe what I just experienced in there. And then you realize what this medium is and why it matters and why it's important to kind of talk about and keep that alive. And whoever can discover these things through like videos like yours, like why that's such a great thing.
And coming back to Scorsese, I remember how painful it was to see The Irishman in the BFI South Bank because it's such a bloated, long movie. And there was a guy sitting in front of me and he was looking at his watch. And I thought that, yeah, this film must end in 10 minutes. But then there was like 90 minutes left. And I was just wanted to die. It's just like the awful experience. And then I kind of decided that I'm never going to go watch these very long films in the cinema again because of that experience. Even though, again, I've seen some other long films in the cinema, like Once Upon a Time in the West, and that was a great watch. Or yeah,
That would be
or even
amazing.
like Tarantino's Hateful Eight. I always criticize Tarantino, but I didn't mind that being a 3-hour film. But I just kind of got this fear from seeing The Irishman that I cannot sit through long films in the cinema again.
Yeah, and then I could imagine you doing a video. I would rather sit through Satan Tango
Yeah.
for 5 hours than watch that again. And then someone will be like, oh, this guy is such a divine snob.
Yeah, I knew someone at the university who had watched Satan Tango in the cinema in one day, 7.5 hours. So it's
Really?
pretty impressive. Yeah,
Yeah.
7.5 hours. So there was an intermission, of course, but still.
Wow. 7 hours straight.
I mean, I've done those kind of crazy binges at home, but it's different at home than it's at the cinema.
I mean, I remember reading Ebert's review on Shoah, and then when he was like, oh, I just finished watching this over the past 9 hours, and I couldn't believe it, because I think that is alien for us, that how could someone be able to do that, right? And even part of my recent kind of, I would say, renaissance in film, because there was a point where I was watching just stuff on streaming and stuff, and I felt so disconnected that I actually stopped watching movies altogether. I was like, this is pointless. It's a waste of time. Like this is not even art. This is just, it's a waste of your time, and you're going to regret it watching so many of these movies. And what brought me back was actually saying to myself, oh, I feel so distracted. I need to challenge myself. I need to like maybe watch 3-hour movies, right? Just to calm my mind. And that's how I discovered Andrei Rublev. And then it set off this new whole discovery. But it's like what you said, the feeling I got from sitting there over 3 hours with something, it's just, you realize you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to be like every 10 minutes looking for something exciting. or to distract me, I'm supposed to journey. Like I'm supposed to go into certain states, and I'm not one of those snobs that's like only long movies, please. But I'm saying that yeah, it's amazing, right? When you hear these stories that someone's going to go and watch that for 7 hours, because you don't even think about what people went through to even make something 7 hours long,
Yeah.
right?
Then
I
there,
mean,
and then there are some of those like long films where you, even though they are long, you still want more. Like I talked about with Drive My Car recently, that I could have watched
yeah,
another 3 hours because I was just absolutely loving the film, all the characters and their struggles and everything. So I could have easily watched 6 hours of that, but we only got 3 hours. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. You know, it's like the human condition. You're like, well, it could have been longer actually. I
Yeah.
would have gone for, more versus less, because it's like it's taking you somewhere. And yeah, Drive My Car, I completely agree. And the fact that it's such an accomplishment, even you mentioned like you're using Chekhov and you're doing all these like crazy things, and the fact that it's as popular as it is.
Yeah.
So it's like as cynical as we can get about modern cinema. It's like stuff like that that makes you feel very optimistic. Like how can he achieve that? Because he brought back so many things that you probably would have thought is dead and like no one would care about anymore. To have that format of the slow burn, and how he added an intro to the actual story, and with the wife, and you're right. Like I mean, that the way you're going on that journey, it's so beautiful. That the film's so beautiful.
And I connected to that film in like many different levels, both in like that intellectually and how it was relatable, but also just through that normal type of enjoyment. And like I talked about in my video, like the actor Masaki Okada, I just fell in love with him. He was so
Oh yeah.
hot with those spaniel eyes. Yeah, yeah. So there's this kind of both this kind of a brain dead way I connected with it, but also this more intellectual way. So it kind of brings us back to what you were saying about again Buffy the Vampire Slayer when you were at university, when you wanted to talk about something serious, but they talked about that hotness of the main actress. But I
Sarah
kind of
Michelle Gellar.
got both of those things from Drive My Car. So it's nice when you kind of can relate to a film in all the different types of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and that film also connects with the whole empathy thing that you're saying, because when you mentioned in that bracket battle when you're discussing the film, that he's not someone you immediately empathize with, right? He's the kind of one that you're like, this guy, right? And without any spoilers, so let's not have spoilers for people who haven't seen it, but you have reasons to not like him very much, right? He's almost kind of like this annoying. He's meant there to annoy the protagonist a bit, but it's his journey and seeing him as a human being with his own, uh, challenges, and and his own pain, trying to, make sense of his own pain and loss. And then all of a sudden, you're like right there with that character, and you don't, you want to journey more with him, like you said. Like with each one of those, it's like you could go on individual journeys more with each one of them, because they're all so interesting in their own regard. They are very interesting together, but each one of them could have a whole path you would like to follow and say, all right, I want to go more into that into that world. So I completely agree. Um, I completely agree with that too.
Yeah, I was kind of weirded out how his story ends. I don't want to spoil it again, but he has this kind of almost like a redemption arc when he talks with
Oh
the
yeah.
other director in the car, and they find this connection here with their very troubling past, with what the Masaki
Mhm.
Okada character did with the theater director's wife and stuff. Again, they have a very weird dynamic there, but then I was thinking that he's slowly becoming like a more empathetic and better person, but then we see his end, which kind of contradicts with that trajectory, but I don't know again how to talk about it without spoiling it too much.
And I know exactly like what you're saying about that, because that juxtaposition. And I wrote, you haven't seen this film, but that's what I wrote in that kind of thing about Belly as well, in when I wrote some thoughts on it on Letterboxd is that the brilliance of that is that you're in this redemption arc, and then there's misalignment, there's dissonance, and it creates such a profound effect on you as the audience that's following. That's like, you're falling in love, like you said, like you fall in love with this character, right? And then you are like rooting for this character, and that honesty, I think, and I think you picked up in one of your videos too on the snobbery, is that honesty about life versus that curation of life, right? What you'd like to happen, like that whole aspect. I think that's what sets us off at times too, is that I know you had to do that as a end to that character because it's more palatable, and that's agitating, right? Why? It should be an insult. Like I always felt that way, and I was much angrier in my 20s. So I'd be like, you should be insulted by this, right? Like when we're talking about Buffy or these things, I was like quite radical, right? I'm a little bit different. I'd be like, why are you not more offended? Because they're offending you as the audience by saying they're not going to tell you the truth, right?
Yeah.
It's that, whatever Kurosawa's brother said to him is like, don't look away. I was like, they're insulting you. You should be angry, right? They're spoon feeding you something, or they're giving you something so you feel better about it. But you shouldn't feel better about anything. You shouldn't feel better about this or good about this or relatively okay with this. You're supposed to leave there and be not okay with this at all. But that's a less pleasant film. And I just want to share, I know I'm going on a bit, but someone who commented on one of my videos, like Richard King, I think he's also used your channel and
Yeah.
Solitary Ronin, and he said, so many more modern films can leave me rather cold or with little to offer other than to say they passed a couple of hours pleasantly enough. That's not why I want to see films. And I thought that was right on, that you enjoy it, but you feel empty. Right? And I'm not saying don't watch things to enjoy it. I feel like it's like if you don't have enough varied, okay, I enjoyed that. That was a good bit of fun. But if you don't get enough of the ones that, then you feel an emptiness, right? You are being duped in one way or another. You're being deprived of something.
And often, again, when you watch many of these type of films, like back to back to back, and sometimes we have these periods when we cannot find those masterpieces, and we just watch these like 3 out of 5 3-star films back to back to back, and it's really easy to lost your passion. That was something that kind of I started thinking about after we read that Richard comment, but I also want to go back to the redemption arc thing a bit, because that actually reminded me of the Sopranos again, with Tony Soprano's character, because of course there's this, when he goes to therapy for all the 6 seasons, we often think that they maybe hit some breakthrough in the therapy. Sometimes, oh, now we realize this about your mother and stuff, that we think that will he get better now, but the Sopranos kind of shows us that some people cannot be redeemed, even though we try that hard. And of course, there's, I think in the final season, Dr. Melfi reads this kind of research paper that says that sociopaths are actually kind of validated by therapy, that they actually get worse due to that therapy because they think that it's not their fault or things like that. So that was really interesting about the Sopranos. I just started thinking about that randomly. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that show is, and it's what you were saying also about in one of your videos about, crime stories, and right, I think you were talking about Goodfellas and all these, and yeah, like the whole thing in Sopranos is such it's such a sleight of hand act, right? Because you think you're watching this crime drama about all this, but it's so much about inner experiences, but it's such a interesting critique of therapy.
Yeah.
Right? And what can you can you achieve or not, or where it goes wrong? Because if the premise is I'm going to be 100% honest, and if the person is not being 100% honest, you are solving the problem that's being represented to you, not the problem as as is, and so that's a whole interesting thing, right? Is this a person? And like you said, it's great because of that. It's like, was I looking at a person, a damaged, traumatized person, or was I looking at a sociopath? Or are there certain people that become sociopathic out of trauma and then there is no redemption? Or is it that it is reverse and we don't know the answers? And it's very uncomfortable, just like in Clockwork Orange, when we realize we don't have the answers. We think we do, and we get a lot of comfort thinking we figured it out. And it's that kind of thing that you're saying about even cinema. We want it to last for that reason, because you see that again, we're very comfortable with our current story, we got this technology, we know where we're going, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And it's like, you're so sure you know everything and that everything is already proven and will be the case. And so many people in so many of these periods thought the exact same thing. We figured it out now. Like even with Freud, like, when Freud's theory came, it was like, that's it. Like psychoanalysis and on the couch and the confessional, and that's it. Like we won't have any psychological problems. And then you have these, great books of literature challenging that, right? This forget the book's name. I'll like email it to you, but it's such an interesting one that it's the same as The Sopranos. This guy is going into therapy, but he's being dishonest in his therapy. And and U.S. audience know he's being dishonest, and then that therapist is like going by what he's saying.
Yeah.
And can that ever be effective? So you raise such a great point there about that.
That also made me think about how many people, when we think about these centuries and decades, some people think that we always progress forwards. It's always upwards trajectory, even though sometimes we actually go backwards, and we can go backwards in society, and we should always be aware that maybe this or that thing will take us backwards and not forwards, because we don't always go forward, even though we like to think that. And obviously it would be nice if we always kept improving, but it's not always like that. Like we have seen like things like World War II or things like that. But yeah, it's just a random point that I often think about.
Yeah, I mean, that's again such an important point, and I think that's also gets, mischaracterized and misunderstood. When you're talking about things like Saving Private Ryan, and you're saying, okay, it's a war film, but is it an anti-war film because of these elements? And like what you're saying, like here is that, yeah, there's that question: did we just go somewhere? Because you got it, even at that time, right? People are like, you're seeing this industrialized warfare. So it's completely, now, are we still following a trajectory? Have we fallen? Have we gone somewhere else altogether, as Lynch does with the whole atom bomb, thing that he weaves into the two Twin Peaks: The Return, and that sort of thing. So if you just watching certain stories, you don't really get into what you're saying, the skin of that moment, and from different perspectives. Because in war films, that's the other challenge, right? To say, yeah, this is interesting because it's mainstream, but yeah, this doesn't matter. But what that experience for that country was during that wartime, or the neighboring countries or whatever, you need to, I feel like, as someone who likes history, you've got to be able to perceive it from that perspective, what was going on, the absolute travesty and tragedy and the disorientation it creates. And this, exactly what you're saying, it breaks all your faith in everything. And you also say, oh, did we just completely devolve? Like, have we gone places worse than we've ever gone? And in some ways, yes, we did, right? Maybe we did. Maybe we went somewhere much worse during World War II than we had ever gone before in human history. And that's a scary thought.
And of course, more recently, we've always thought that, yeah, Europe will always be peaceful from now on, but then we have this Ukraine-Russia war and things like that. So we kind of always have this false sense of safety and happiness, even though again war can come to us still to this day, even though we have developed so much here in Europe. But maybe we shouldn't get into that. But again, these are very interesting topics, but maybe now in the end we should talk about something very more lighthearted. So I think we would both maybe just recommend some pieces of art, whether it's film or books or music. So I can go first with one. So for literature, for reading, I think you guys should read Tony's and mine like comment section exchanges. I think that would be better than any book you can read, because me and Tony are the highest possible intellectuals in the planet. But yeah.
The modern Socratic dialogue between you two.
Yeah. I mean, Tony always talks about like Platonic dialogue, and he always uses it in his like reviews of these art house films, like Eric Romer films, that this is like Platonic dialogue on film and things like this. Like it sounds so nicely beautiful and intellectual. Good for you, Tony.
Good for you. Good for you, Tony. I'm glad you could see that. No, I agree. I mean, something I watched recently that I was, again, it relates to our chat, right? The high esteem we have for the initial Star Wars trilogy, right? Starting with Episode 4, and that's the ultimate hero's journey and all that. And I just, last week went through the Samurai trilogy, and for me, I was just like, this is just so incredible. Like, I could watch this over and over, and it's like, this idea that this hero's journey was this new discovery. We're taking myth and we're now bringing to film is like completely wrong, and it's like all the elements are there, and it's just a beautiful journey over 3 films, and I was like completely captivated by it. So I highly recommend that. I would also say Criterion sales coming up, so pick it up. But I know that this is another part of snobby dialogue, whether you're saying something, mentioning it as a boutique label, I always want to clear up that it's about the film, not the label. Whatever way you decide to watch it is what matters. Watch the film, but just sometimes it's the only way you can watch the film, or you get some extra post-film dialogue that really adds more flavor and context, and that's what I love. Like learning more about the history and context and what was going on and what this piece of art had to do with what was going on, or this particular director's viewpoints.
Yeah, I can also highly recommend the Samurai trilogy. I absolutely adore those films, and the story of Musashi Miyamoto is so interesting. Of course, the film isn't like accurate portrayal of his life, but some of it actually happened, some of it didn't. But actually, funnily, this year when I got back to reading manga, there's this great, very acclaimed manga called Vagabond, which is about Musashi Miyamoto as well.
Okay.
So it goes through its story as well, although the manga hasn't been finished because the writer kind of stopped making it, but there are like 30-something volumes, so the story goes. Wow. So it starts when he's really young and when he's getting into sword playing, and then he becomes this like the best samurai in Japan, but then he also again becomes to develop his kind of philosophical thoughts, and he starts farming and starts to think about his violent past and stuff like that. So it's a very deep manga, but it's also like really funny or fun with the like huge bloody action scenes with the samurai stuff, but it also has kind of deeper meaning to it. It's has great artwork. So that was a fun read for me back in, I think, June or something. Yeah.
Yeah, manga. How do you read it? You buy the physical copies, or what do you do?
Yeah,
I know nothing about manga. I'm just like learning about this stuff, so I just
you can read it online these days too.
Okay.
Obviously, that's way cheaper, but obviously the physical copies are way nicer. But I have some manga and I want to get into collecting more in the future. But again, it's hard to balance all these collecting of it. Yeah.
And when you online, you do what, like Kindle or something like through Amazon, or how?
There are some kind of streaming services, kind of like streaming services where you can kind of sub for a month and then you can read various manga in those websites.
Okay.
But there are so many, I think, different ways. Again, I'm pretty much a beginner to this still, and I haven't read that much manga yet, but it's a really fun hobby. So I think people who like anime will probably like manga as well.
I mean, this is one of the things that blew my mind that I learned from your channel is just anime. I didn't know anime goes back, first of all, so long, and the brilliant anime that exists like from I was like, how is this made in the 80s? This is like absolutely phenomenal. And how did I not know about it in the 80s? But yeah, so thanks for those recommendations as well. Like, I mean, Angel's Egg, I mean, it's incredible. So
I actually recommend one anime now that I haven't talked about on my channel. So this is my final recommendation. Then after that you can give one more to us. But it's called Blue Period. I think you actually added it to your watch list on Letterboxd. I saw you adding it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I usually auto add as soon as I see you watch something. I pretty much add it, except I didn't add the Covenant.
Yeah, but this is actually very easily accessible in Netflix. So it's this 1 season long series, again, 12 20-minute long episodes, so it's like 4 hours something. But I think it actually relates to so many of the things that we have talked about here, so that's why I kind of want to recommend it, because it's about this high school student who's a good student, but he isn't really passionate about anything or interested in anything, but then he suddenly falls in love with painting, and he gets absolutely obsessed about painting, and he starts to paint his own drawings and paintings, and he goes to this art club at his high school, and then he tries to get into the Tokyo School of Arts, which is a really hard place to get into. So he meets these other artists, and they show the struggles of these young artists, how hard it is to get into university, how hard it is to become a great artist, and are you just mimicking other great artists, or can you find your own voice? And it has lots of that, also that great kind of coming of age struggle type of thing, and it's also very, very modern and very progressive, especially for Japan, that is fairly conservative country. So there's even some like queer representation in that show, which I liked, and it's such a great show. Again, it's also based on a manga. Apparently, the manga might be even better. And there's more of that manga than of this show, because this show came out a couple of years ago, so there might be more seasons to it, but I think it works as a 1 season long thing. But I just absolutely devoured it. And I started it, I just fell in love with it in 5 minutes. It just spoke to me in a very, very high level. And I think I kind of got like so in love with it that I couldn't even see many flaws in it, but there might be, again, flawed aspects to it, but it just kind of spoke to me in such a personal level as an art lover and intellectual, or wannabe intellectual.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I mean, I definitely want to watch that. And even that one that you had mentioned, I think it's called The Silent Voice. You said, is it A Silent Voice?
Yeah.
The one about. Yeah, I will definitely want to watch that as well. So I always, your brackets I think are brilliant because they introduce so much like great art across the board, whether it's films, whether it's music, right? Paintings, books. Like, I mean, I think that's absolutely incredible. And yeah, in terms of if its final recommendation, I mean, this one is going to be one that you recommended to me, and so I'm just putting it just back out there because, to be honest, recently I was feeling like, I wanted to kind of connect to what I was trying to do in the channel, like talking like about films, and then I wasn't feeling that spark that we could talk about. And for me, it's a feeling sometimes a film just sparks that feeling. Oh yeah, no, this is something to talk about. And a legend, or was it Kinoshita's film that's on the Criterion channel? I mean, thank you for recommending that, and I again put that out there as a recommendation because that film. I mean, it's just one of those films that just makes you pause. It just made me pause about what it was saying, how it's saying it, how if you keep mining it, it's deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into all these things, and yet it's like not even 90 minutes, I think. And I hadn't seen much Kinoshita. The first one I watched was your recommendation, which was
The
which
River
one's?
Fuefuki.
The River Fukuki, yeah.
Yeah.
wow. How is that like not more of that on his stuff on Blu-ray? Why is there not a Kaneshita's like set? But yeah, this is another one I recommend just because of what it's talking about. Same thing you're talking about is that you have this event in history and then you pretend like it never happened, in this forcing of revisiting and reckoning with that, because the danger of living in this placid state where you think that never happened and that it could not happen again, and it ties to all these themes you were mentioning about Europe or whatnot, because at any moment it can happen again. You see it already. People come and they reinterpret history and present simple truths, and then all of a sudden you're right back. You could be polarizing, you could stoke anger and all these things, and these are uncomfortable things we don't want to accept of ourselves, how we become mobs. And this film explores that, and how you can easily create a mob, and create yeah, what a beautiful film. And maybe I don't know, I might talk about it in a video. I would like to.
Yeah, again, Kinoshita's films, many of them are on the Criterion channel if people want to check them out, and they are in pretty good quality.
So many of them, right?
Yeah, there are, I think, maybe a dozen or even more. Yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how many there are and how little of them are actually in Criterion's actual collection. It's shocked me.
Yeah, I think some of them are on some of the Eclipse sets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's like one Eclipse set that has maybe 5 or 6, and then you have Ballad of Narayama in the Blu-ray, and I don't know if there's anything other than that. But these are criminal. I wanted to actually, but one of those things is like criminal that there isn't more of these guys. One is Kinoshita, one is Mizoguchi. I see that Eureka had this late Mizoguchi set that now goes for like £350 or more, and I'm just like, that's it. Like, we may never see it again, or that's crazy.
Yeah. So I think that was it for the shout outs. I mean, I'm gonna give a big shout out to Björk. She's one of my favorites. She's been looking after me in this talk. Behind me, she's one of my heroes. So, and Tony Beaches likes him as well. So another shout out to Tony. Again, I think he's a bit weirded out how I shout him out in every single video of them multiple times, but he deserves it.
Can you imagine the way people perceive him now? He's getting all these shout outs, like in everyone's mind, he is this invisible god, like he just exists. He's Deus ex machina. He's like God outside the machine. Like he's making this all move, and we're just puppets.
Yeah, he just really knows his stuff. Yeah, yeah, he's such a great writer too. If you read his letterbox reviews.
Yeah. He writes incredibly. He's like amazing. Yeah, I do read his stuff, and even in his comments, how he expresses himself, I don't know what to say half the time. I'm like, how do you respond to this?
Yeah, I usually just try to say something funny.
Yeah.
No, it's kind of funny when I always start the comments with "Thank you, Beaches." It's just so much fun, and then we always make fun of Nolan and stuff. Yeah, it's just fun. It's great to meet people like that. And you always wish that you could meet that type of person like in real life too, but it's always on the internet. But what can you do? What can you do?
Yeah, that is one of the cool things about the internet, that you can meet people like that. But yeah, in real life it is more difficult because, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a great OC quote for the end, but again, there was one episode in the 4th season where they obsess about this Takeshi Kitano action figure that is really rare. So that was really funny. Yeah.
Takeshi Kitano action figure. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to get back to watching that. All right, I kind of fell off from watching that, but it's like, all these things you mentioned, and when they drop those references, it's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah. But thanks for coming on this podcast. I think we did quite a long chat. We had some technical difficulties, but that's kind of to be expected when we use this kind of dinosaur age technology with Skype. I think next time we do do a podcast, we should definitely try out maybe StreamYard or something, and not like Skype. But anyway, thanks for coming on this podcast. One more shout out to Tony, and hopefully everybody has a great week, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Sayonara. Sayonara and arigato gozaimashita.